Joining me now is Timothy Snyder, history professor at Yale University, the author of Thinking About newsletter on Substack. He's the author of several important books on freedom and on tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. Professor Snyder, thank you for being here. You have been warning voters for a very long time that Donald Trump has the intentions of turning our country into an authoritarian state. You've so much as urged voters not to choose him, but now we are here. How do you remain politically engaged when the possibility of another Trump administration makes you feel really bleak right now?
Well, as you say, you have to be in the moment in order to get through the moment. And of course, it's natural to be distressed or upset. But what you shouldn't be is anxious or lonely, because that's the state which makes authoritarianism possible. After all, Donald Trump is just one person. And as Professor Tribe was saying, he's enmeshed in many difficulties from the beginning. And I would add that the group of people that we elected along with Donald Trump, which means Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Vladimir Putin, J.D. Vance, these people are not necessarily going to get along with one another over the long term. It's much more easy for them to defeat the other candidate than it will be for them to govern. They're going to have problems. What we need to be able to see is that he can't do it on his own. He can't do it without us. So that means that we have to imagine all the little ways that we can fill in the gaps. I think we should speak not so much of guardrails, which that metaphor means he's bumping up against us all the time, but rather of well springs or safe houses or things that we build together that make that flower, that bloom, that encourage other people to act. And the other problem with the guardrails thing is that they're not there on their own. They're not just there by the side of the highway, right? The things that exist that restrain Mr. Trump are going to be things that we actually create. The institutions, the states, as Professor Tribe quite rightly said, they're important, but they're more important when we believe in them, when we recognize their constitutional authority, as he said, but also when we lend them our ears, when we lend them our time, and we say, oh, yes, we like what our state is doing, or what our city is doing, or what our city council is doing, and we're going to support it along the way.
You wrote a piece for Commonwealth Magazine back in 2020 that could have been published a week ago. I want to read a little bit from it. It says, in this transition from democracy to authoritarianism, otherwise known as a coup d'etat, the actual number of people who vote for Trump matters less than it would in an ordinary election. In this scenario, it matters more how angry they are and how willing some of them are to endorse extraordinary actions by Trump or to take such actions themselves. Talk to me about this mindset of Donald Trump voters and the fact that they might be feeling uniquely emboldened right now.
I think we're in an interesting moment, right? Because many of us, as you say, are distressed because Trump won, but the reasons why he won are very different from the reasons he might succeed in transforming our system into a different kind of system. And so we have to shift from our distress into tactical thinking and into warm cooperation. Meanwhile, his people were all, or many of them anyway, were all geared up for the idea that he was going to lose the election and that extraordinary action would need to be taken. But wait a minute, he won the election, so why do the rest of us have to be rounded up? Where is that energy going to come from? What are they going to protest? Why should they storm the Capitol? Their guy's already there. So in a certain sense, I think this is an opportunity, because when they come down in late January and say a whole list of extraordinary things have to be done, beginning with deportations, I think that's a good moment for people to say, wait a minute, why? Let's hold on. Let's ask the courts. Let's do nothing. Let's talk to our neighbors about why something like this is really necessary, because it isn't.
One of the things, your first point on tyranny is do not obey in advance. And for people who are saying, well, it's not in advance anymore, he's now the president, that rule still stays. Your point about do not obey in advance is not about an election. It's about everything that tyrannical rule can do and every effort it makes.
Yeah, it's actually a lesson which comes directly out from the middle of authoritarian regimes. It comes from a German term. I mean, it comes from Hitler's transition to power. It comes from the middle of the 1930s, and in various ways, it was also recalled by the anti-communist dissidents of the 1970s. It's a lesson which actually comes from authoritarian regimes and not from elections. And the whole idea is that these people can't do it on their own. And if you allow yourself to believe they can do it on their own, then you're going to find yourself helping them, or at least being passive. When you say don't obey in advance, that means who am I? What do I stand for? What's normal to me? What am I not going to do? You try to define your own reality as a free person and not to get dragged along by conformism. And that makes a huge difference, right? Not despairing, knowing what you think is right, and just not conforming in advance. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of examples around us of people doing that, and we should note those examples and try to do the opposite. As in previous segments, people have said, do what state governors are doing, defy in advance, don't obey in advance.
Right, and while it feels hopeless to some people who may be watching us this morning, and maybe some people who aren't because they can't take any more news this week, the point is you are not a different person than you were a week ago. The circumstances around you have changed by virtue of the outcome of this election. But if you were fighting to preserve abortion rights a week ago, you're still fighting for that. If you were fighting to keep books on shelves, you're still, as we are with the book club, we're still fighting for that. You remain the same person despite who becomes the president of the United States and who won the control of Congress.
That is exactly what the lesson is. You've stated it so beautifully, but you have to make sure you remain that person, which is what freedom means. Freedom means you decide who you are, and then when things change around you, you continue to be that person. And in so doing, you do constructive work. You set an example for other people. You meet new people who are also trying to remain themselves. And I'm going to note an anniversary that other people aren't noting. This is 35 years ago, communism came to an end. And it didn't come to an end because the Berlin Wall fell, which is what people are talking about today. The Berlin Wall never fell. There was never some barrier which fell on its own. The reason communism came to an end was because there was a messy authoritarian regime governed by a group of people, the Politburo, who couldn't get along, and people managed to find ways to cooperate, especially by way of an important labor union in Poland called Solidarity. It was the cooperation, it was the courage, it was the not obeying in advance, which created the conditions for things to get better. So, and this is going to be true of all authoritarian regimes or all aspiring ones. They have their own problems, and when we work together, we make those problems worse, and we give ourselves a chance.
Timothy Snyder, thank you. Thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank you for the efforts you continue to take. And thank you for reminding us of the ways as individuals and as citizens that we do not have to accept things that we do not wish to accept. Timothy Snyder is a history professor at Yale University. He's the author of several important books on freedom and on tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century.